and welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that stubbornly soldiers on despite its absolutely pathetic market share. And speaking of pathetic market shares, today's topic is definitely going to fall into that category. So, I guess I'm about due to do another episode on a dead consumer video format. Or is it a video format for dead consumers? Whatever. This is actually a really significant one because this was the first format to make a real impact on consumers as opposed to professionals and schools and that sort of stuff. And you've already seen clips of this format from me just up the wazoo. And if you've watched enough of my little spin-off shows, you've seen me discuss my equipment on this and all that great stuff. But hey, now you'll have the history lesson and everything in one convenient package. So without further ado, let's bring on the Betamax. No!
Ever want to watch two things that are on at the same time? Well, now you can, because Sony's revolutionary Betamax deck, which hooks up to any TV set, can actually videotape something off one channel while you're watching another channel.
While I do have a massive soft spot for Betamax, I think I can honestly say that I have no nostalgic feelings towards it, as I grew up in a 100% dyed-in-the-wool VHS household. To the best of my knowledge, none of my friends, neighbors, or extended family had ever jumped on the Beta wagon either. Honestly, I don't even remember where or when I first heard of this format. If I had to guess, it might have been seeing the occasional old "also available on Beta" sticker on some tapes at the video store during the 90s, a sticker that I can't even prove existed at this point. Regardless, when I saw my first ever Beta deck at a Goodwill in about 2010, I snapped it up. Hell, at $7, how could I refuse? Anyway, ever since, I've been something of a quasi-closet Beta junkie, accruing 3 players and a few hundred tapes in the process.
You know what television is? That's the box they buried radio in.
Jack Benny, you're wrong, Dad.
Sony, the Japanese electronics giant, had been taking stabs at a home video unit since 1965 when they released the CV, or Consumer Video 2000. For its time, the CV 2000 was quite an achievement, allowing the average person to record up to 1 hour of video on open reel tape in black and white. Problem was, there was no way to set unattended recordings. Well, that and the nearly $700 in 1965 dollars price tag, plus $40 per reel of tape, kept the CV series out of reach for most folks. Oh yeah, and there was no way to adjust the tracking either.
Welcome to Banjo in the Hollow, a program of traditional as well as contemporary folk music. Tonight, the sounds of bluegrass.
Hello. This videotape demonstration has been recorded on the Sony Color video cassette and is being played by the Sony Color video cassette system.
In 1971, Sony introduced the U-matic 3/4-inch video cassette machine, which also, at the time at least, allowed for up to 1 hour of footage to be recorded on some rather huge tapes. Unlike the CV series, the U-matic could record in color and could record one scheduled event as long as it was no more than 24 hours away. Depending on which model you had, sometimes the necessary tuner timer would be built in, but more often than not, you needed one of these babies, at an additional $400. On that note, while Sony intended the U-matic as a domestic device, the sheer cost made it mostly a product for professionals and schools. A U-matic rig in 1972 would have cost about $1,400 for the VCR, $400 for the tuner timer, and $30 for a single tape. In May of 1975, in Japan only, Sony took their next stab at releasing a home video unit, namely the Betamax. This time, the idea was to have all the perks of the U-matic, just in a more compact package. In a way, the Betamax was just a smaller U-matic. Once again, tapes could hold up to 1 hour of footage, and the units could schedule one recording for no more than 24 hours away. The only real technical improvement, as of 1975, was that Betamax carried a resolution of 250 lines, as opposed to U-matic's 240 lines, assuming the U-matic recording was in color. Now, you'd think that Sony would have learned by this point, but there was a very costly catch to Beta. The original Betamax unit was only available as part of a whole console. Read, you had to buy a new TV too. Depending on your source, Betamax found its way to the US in either October or November of 1975, retailing for $2,495, plus to the tune of $15 for a 30-minute tape, or to the tune of $20 for a 60-minute tape.
You can, because Sony's revolutionary Betamax deck, which hooks up to any TV...
In the spring of 1976, Sony pulled the VCR itself out of the console unit, added some design touches to it, like wood veneer paneling, and released it as the first standalone Beta unit at a cost of $1,400, plus another $40 for a DT30 external timer. That fall, JVC introduced the VHS VCR, again, only in Japan. The VHS, right out of the gate, could record up to 2 hours at 240 lines of resolution. By the time VHS dropped in the US in August of 1977, that time increased to 4 hours thanks to a new slower record/playback mode. The initial American VHS decks were only slightly more affordable than Beta, coming in at around $1,200, though tapes were often to the tune of $30 a pop early on.
Well, fortunately, you're looking at a simple solution to your problems. Sony Betamax. With it, you can do things with your television you never thought possible. Let's say, for example, the 7th game of the basketball playoffs is on, or some other terrific show that you not only want to watch, but record.
In response to VHS, later in 1977, Sony introduced the SL8200, which introduced the B2 or X2 speed, allowing for recordings of up to 2 hours, albeit lowering the resolution to 240 lines in the process. To coincide with the new speed, Sony abandoned the old K30 and K60 tapes in favor of the more impressive-sounding L250 and L500 tapes, 250 and 500 corresponding to how many feet of tape were in each cassette. In 1979, Sony introduced the SL5400, they were kind of going backwards with the numbers, which introduced the B3 or X3 speed, now allowing for, on an L500 tape, up to 3 hours of record time. To hedge their bets, Sony also introduced the L750 and L830 tapes, allowing for up to, respectively, 4.5 and 5 hours of recording time. In 1980, the extended play, or EP mode for VHS was introduced, allowing for up to 6 hours of record time on a standard T120 tape. VHS ultimately topped out at 10 hours of potential record time in EP mode on a single tape.
Sony Beta Hi-Fi. The theater experience hits home.
In 1983, Sony felt like they finally had the ace up their sleeve that they needed to shut down VHS once and for all. This came by way of the introduction of Beta Hi-Fi, which allowed for an, at the time unequaled, audio frequency response of 20 Hz to 20 kHz. The Hi-Fi VHS was introduced a year later. In 1985, Sony introduced Super Beta, which allowed for up to 290 lines of resolution. However, by this point, any improvements with Beta, on the consumer level at least, were a moot point, as VHS was outselling Beta by a solid 5-to-1 ratio. In 1988, Sony, symbolically at least, admitted defeat when they started manufacturing their own VHS units. Despite this, Betamax did manage to carry on for a few more years as a sort of niche format, kind of like Laserdisc, but the demand just wasn't there. In the early 90s, any remaining production on pre-recorded beta tapes ended. The last American consumer-grade Betamax, namely the Sony SL-HF2000, rolled off the line in 1993. Weirdly enough, though, Sony soldiered on with the Betamax, albeit in greatly reduced form, for many more years, with the last Betamax unit in general rolling off the line in 2002. The last blank beta tapes didn't roll off the line until March of 2016. I know I mentioned all this back in the first Format Wars episode, but I think it merits repeating here. The Betamax didn't fail because it was a bad product, far from it, but instead I think it was the result of three things. One, Sony made the mistake of trying to control the market by being ultra stingy with the licensing so that other companies could make their own beta decks. 2, JVC was very liberal about licensing the VHS technology, allowing for many manufacturers to make the decks, leading to lower prices and greater availability. And 3, aside from lower prices, VHS from day one had a leg up on recording time. Despite Sony's best efforts at keeping up, 10 hours of potential recording time on a beta was just never gonna happen. And because I know I'm gonna hear about it if I don't mention it, no, I don't think the porn industry sealed the Betamax's fate. Contrary to popular belief, neither Sony nor JVC held any sway on what tape-based formats the adult film companies could release their product on. Lucrative as adult film is, I just don't think they made enough impact in the greater scheme of things to swing things in either direction. Sony spun off Betamax in a number of ways intended for professional use. Here's a little rundown. In 1982, Betacam was introduced. While using the same tape stock, even the same cassettes as regular Betamax, Betacam was recorded and played back via component video and was capable of 300 lines of resolution. And yes, Betacam was incompatible with standard Betamax. In 1986, Betacam SP, or Superior Performance, was introduced, sporting 340 lines of resolution. 1993 saw the introduction of Digital Betacam, or Digibeta, with 480 lines of resolution, as well as pushing the technology into full-on digital data compression territory. 1996 saw the release of Betacam SX, which was intended as a cheaper alternative to Digibeta and was backwards compatible with Betacam SP. In 1997, HDCam was introduced, pushing the technology into high definition as we know it today territory. And lastly, MPEG IMX was introduced in 2001. It was basically a refined version of Betacam SX, just with higher bitrate encoding. On the prosumer front, the only real extension of Betamax came by way of ED, or Extended Definition Beta, which was introduced in 1988. ED Beta was intended not so much as a means of higher quality off-air recordings, though I guess it could be used that way, so much as it was intended for, say, wedding photographers and AV classes. ED Beta offered up to 500 lines of resolution.
Just put the cassette in, check the channel that you want.
Despite having over a decade to fret about it, in 1976, Hollywood finally sat up and took notice of this whole home video thing, and finally deemed it enough of a threat to take legal action. Disney and Universal Studios sued Sony over the Betamax, and indirectly the whole VCR market, claiming that the ability to record programs off-air counted as copyright infringement. It took until 1984, but the Supreme Court deemed home recordings, as long as they weren't being sold, to be a fair use of copyrighted material. Oddly enough, in the 8 years that it took for the case to play out, home video releases had become a huge part of the studio's income. In 1985 alone, the major studios netted a $1.5 billion profit from the sale of pre-recorded videos. I don't want to spend much time on my own beta gear because I think it's pretty well trodden already within the realm of archivedom. But in the name of completeness, I figured I'd better trot them out one more time, and so here we go. Let's start at the beginning. This is that first beta deck that I ever owned, and this is a Sony, they're all Sonys, and this is an SLO 325 industrial unit. It dates to, I believe, 1980 or 81. It records only in B1 mode, but it'll play back all 3 speeds. And this is my go-to deck for off-air tapes with weak video signals. But having said that, this has kind of a problem on the audio front, because if it's got weak audio for whatever reason, the audio has a way on those tapes of coming in tilted to the left or right within the stereo image, and sometimes it'll actually shift on me during playback. But weirdly enough, with the mass-manufactured pre-recorded stuff, this thing works like a champ. So it does have its uses. Now, let me swing around here. And this is my newest acquisition, and this is an SL-HF 400, which was the first and I believe lowest end Super Beta unit. And this particular one dates to 1985 or 86. The fast forward and rewind keys are a little funky on this thing, but I have a remote that mostly works with this, so it's not really too big of an issue. And this unit tends to be my go-to for better recorded off-air stuff. It just seems to like them a little better in the greater scheme of things. And let's see here. It will record in regular beta and super beta, B2 and B3 modes. It'll play back standard beta 1 and then standard and super beta 2 and 3. So there you go. And then let's just pop out for a bit here and take a look at my third and final unit, which is kind of in the doghouse right now. This is an SL-HF 840D, same recording and playback stuff as that last unit, but this one, it was also intended as a low-end editing unit. You can see some of the cheesy little effects there, and I did a Ben's junk on this at one point, so you can actually see that stuff in action. But this one's kind of in the, I guess you could say it's in the doghouse right now, because when I eject a tape, it'll lace it back up and everything, but when it comes to actually spitting out the tape, it'll only spit the tape out partially. And unfortunately, it's not enough for me to go in there and, pick it out by hand. So I've greased the tracks and everything, I've checked the belts, and nothing's really worked, so the cynic in me thinks it's probably a bad cap. So this one's just on ice for now. Anyway, there you go. That's all my betas. One thing that I've been asked, just time and again, almost since day one of Archive, is, am I a VHS sort of guy, or am I a Betamax sort of guy? Honestly, I don't have a simple answer for you on that, so let me try and explain. With regards to off-air recordings, I'm a beta guy, all the way. And the reason for that is, in my experience at least, with off-air VHS recordings, especially if they're in LP or EP mode, colors get over-exaggerated, and sometimes the picture even seems to go a little bit out of focus. And I never seem to have that problem with beta, even if it's only in B3 mode. It just never seems to happen. And it always just feels truer to what was actually broadcast. So there you go. Now, with regards to pre-recorded stuff, I don't really have much of a preference. I mean, to be honest, half the time I can't even really tell the difference. But having said that, with regards to old school video formats for pre-recorded stuff, I'll take me a Laserdisc over VHS or Betamax any day. Anyway, that's it for today's archive. Join us next time when I get banned from every Betamax and VHS enthusiasts forum on the internet over my little commentary there.
It stands alone. Only one question remains. At what point in time will you place the Betamax at your command?
And then, of course, there are those lazy afternoons when all you want to do is lie around and watch ball games all day. But your family has some other ideas. Well, with Betamax, you can even record shows when you're not home.